On this edition for Sunday, August 26th, America mourns Senator John McCain.
And a truly extraordinary giant of the Senate and really of the country.
He leaves a legacy of service and courage.
And in our signature segment, how professional tennis is trying to diversify the next generation of players as the U.S. Open turns 50. Next on PBS NewsHour Weekend.
From the Tisch WNET studios at Lincoln Center in New York, Hari Srinivasan.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. Senator John McCain, the influential Arizona Republican senator and two-time presidential candidate, died yesterday at his home near Sedona, Arizona. He was 81 and had an aggressive brain cancer for the past year. Crowds lined the route as the hearse bearing his body traveled from his ranch to a Phoenix funeral home last night. In Washington, D.C., flags were lowered to half-staff. And in Vietnam, where then Navy pilot McCain was captive for more than 5 years as a prisoner of war, mourners placed flowers on a memorial honoring him. As senator, his political leadership was key in normalizing relations between Vietnam and the U.S. John Sidney McCain III was born in 1936 on an American naval base, the son of a naval officer stationed in the Panama Canal Zone. He went on to attend the Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland, following in the footsteps of his father and grandfather, who both served as four-star admirals. McCain graduated in 1958 and became a Navy pilot 2 years later. He volunteered for combat during the Vietnam War. In October of 1967, his plane was shot down over Hanoi during a bombing mission. He was captured, beaten, and tortured, and held as prisoner of war for 5.5 years. In that time, he tried to take his own life twice and signed a coerced confession. He refused an offer of early release after the Vietnamese learned that his father was a high-ranking Navy official. McCain was released in 1973, returning to the U.S. a hero. In 1982, McCain began what would be his decades-long political career, winning a seat in the U.S. Congress from his home state of Arizona twice. 4 years later, he was elected to the Senate, where he remained for 6 terms. But his political career was not always successful. In 2000, he made his first presidential run and lost to George W. Bush in the primaries.
I know how to fight, and I know how to make peace. I know who I am and what I want to do.
In 2008, he ran again, this time winning the Republican nomination, choosing Sarah Palin as his running mate and then losing to Barack Obama. Throughout his long career in office, Senator McCain continued to be a political maverick. He opposed the use of torture during President George W. Bush's administration and sponsored an anti-torture bill that passed Congress and was signed by President Bush in 2005. In July of 2017, after surgery to remove a blood clot in his eye revealed a malignant brain tumor, Senator McCain made a dramatic return to the Capitol for a late-night vote against President Trump's proposed legislation to end Obamacare. His vote defeated the bill. Before the vote, he addressed his colleagues.
We're getting nothing done, my friends. We're getting nothing done.
President Trump frequently criticized and even insulted Senator McCain, both during the 2016 campaign and in office. Last night, he sent out a brief tweet that read, "My deepest sympathies and respect go out to the family of Senator John McCain. Our hearts and prayers are with you." In a statement, former President George W. Bush, who defeated McCain in his first presidential run, remembered him as a friend, saying, "Some lives are so vivid, it is difficult to imagine them ended. Some voices are so vibrant, it is hard to think of them stilled." And in his statement, President Barack Obama acknowledged his political differences with his former presidential opponent, but said they shared, quote, "fidelity to something higher, the ideals for which generations of Americans and immigrants alike have fought, marched, and sacrificed." Today, Senator McCain's colleagues recalled his military career, his courage, and his devotion to service.
He made sure that he got no special treatment because his father was the four-star commander of U.S. Pacific Command. In fact, at that time, again, a real force in so many different ways, and always one who felt that serving a cause larger than self was the greatest of privileges.
He leaves a legacy of service and courage.
He would quickly forgive and move on, and to see the good in his opponents. That is something that, particularly these days, we could use a lot more of. That's a lesson that he taught everyone.
The senator who served his country in politics and in the military was both outspoken and brave, even when he was being treated for brain cancer and facing the possibility that he was nearing the end of his life.
How do you want the American people to remember you?
He served his country, and not always right. Made a lot of mistakes, made a lot of errors, but served his country, and I hope we could add honorably.
Senator John McCain's body will lie in state in Arizona's capital, then in the U.S. Capitol Rotunda. His funeral will be held at Washington, D.C.'s National Cathedral. At his request, the eulogies will be delivered by former Presidents Barack Obama and George W. Bush. He will be buried at the Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland. For a personal look back at Senator John McCain's career and how his legacy may affect the country's political future, we turn now to NewsHour Weekend special correspondent Jeff Greenfield, who joins us from Santa Barbara. Jeff, you've covered him a long time. Anything that comes to mind, a story?
Well, the sheer complexity of the man is what most focused my attention. A guy who could had a fierce temper. Believe me, I was the victim of that. He could also reconcile with political foes, even with a Vietnam dissenter who'd gone to Vietnam while he was imprisoned and tortured. And I guess my most vivid memory, a lot of journalists will tell you this, was that Straight Talk Express barreling through New Hampshire in 2000, where he was in full command of his faculties, telling the press everything here's on the record, going to hundreds of town halls, defying his party on issues from tax cuts to campaign finance reform, as in other moments he would compromise politically. I once said to him as he was coming back from the politically dead at the end of 2007, is there something about you that requires you to be dangling off a cliff, hanging to a frayed rope before you start to succeed? And he kind of laughed and said, I think there's something to that. So as I said, this was a very complicated man, but somebody who was very different from the normal cut of your politicians. And I think that's one of the reasons why he's getting so much reverence, in spite of his flaws, at his passing.
He's the first to admit that he did not live a perfect life, that he'd made several mistakes. One of those mistakes was the Keating 5 scandal, where he and 4 other senators were accused of influencing what happened to Charles Keating, or what could have happened to the Savings and Loans Bank that Charles Keating was running. How significant was that blemish or stain on his record for him?
I think it changed his life. I think even though he was relatively exonerated by the Senate, and they said he'd made mistakes, but not as grievous as other senators, he felt deeply dishonored by that, felt guilty, and it's why he turned and made campaign finance reform one of the centerpieces of his political efforts, aligning himself with one of the most liberal Democrats in the Senate, Russ Feingold. And his whole future political message, I think, was shaped by the fact that he needed to redeem himself in his own eyes for that mistake.
Jeff, Senator McCain is getting the send-off usually reserved for presidents. Put that in the context of the political climate we're living in now.
The contrast between McCain, the reconciliation with former foes, the insistence on putting country first, unmistakably is in very sharp contrast to our current president. When John McCain died, amid all the outpouring from past political opponents, this president extended, quote, hearts and prayers to the family. And in his message, there's not a word about John McCain's service to his country or what he endured in Vietnam. And I think to some extent, you can't separate the passing of McCain from the feeling that's in the country now. On a different note, I think you have to acknowledge that McCain's choice for running mate in 2008, Governor Palin, in the way she campaigned and in the way she appears, was tapping into the kind of more zealous sentiments that Trump successfully tapped into within the base of the Republican Party. So for all kinds of reasons, McCain's death throws a spotlight, I think, on where we are today.
Let's talk a little bit about that sentiment that is the fuel for the president now. Coming off of this week, where, of course, his critics say this was one of his worst weeks ever, his supporters affected by this?
Well, I've been hearing for 3 years now that this is it for Trump. He can't survive this. I mean, we've had this conversation so often we could probably run tape replays. But you look at at the difference, for instance, between the Watergate metaphor that everybody raises and now, and once again, his party controls both houses of Congress. The people in that congressional wing of the party know that the base of the Republican Party is devoted to Trump and will punish Republicans who dissent from that. And you've got a counter media, whether it's Fox News or Breitbart or talk radio, that keeps changing the goalposts. Every time we learn, oh, that did happen, they'll say, well, that doesn't matter. You know, if he used his personal funds to pay off girlfriends to hide affairs, well, you know, that's personal. Campaign finance violations? No, they really aren't. Did his lawyer flip and is now saying that the president has done terrible things? He's an admitted liar. So unless and until these different perils, the flipping of Michael Cohen, the immunity granted to his top financial advisor and a tabloid publisher, unless they reveal something that is going to shake that base, I don't think things change. And today's Wall Street Journal NBC poll suggests that the president's support is pretty much where it was when the week started.
All right, Jeff Greenfield, thanks so much.
Okay.
Read more and watch our extended report on the life of John McCain on our website, pbs.org/newshour. Multiple people are dead in what's being described as a mass shooting at a riverfront mall in Jacksonville, Florida, according to Florida authorities. The Jacksonville Sheriff's Office says there was only one suspect. The AP quotes a source as saying the suspect died of a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Authorities say they have cleared the area. The shooting occurred during a video game tournament, and sounds of gunfire were heard on a live stream from the website Twitch. It's unclear how many others were injured in the shooting. Pope Francis wrapped up his two-day visit to Ireland today amid new accusations by an archbishop that Francis knew about abuses by a now disgraced cardinal. Pope Francis held an open-air mass in Dublin in front of tens of thousands of worshippers before departing for the Vatican. He asked for forgiveness for the, quote, crimes of the church's sexual abuse scandal. But the Pope did not address accusations leveled in a public letter published today by the former Vatican ambassador to the United States. Archbishop Carlo Maria Vigano, a fierce conservative critic of the Pope, called on Pope Francis to step down. He said the Pope and other senior church officials ignored accusations against disgraced ex-cardinal Theodore McCarrick for years. McCarrick resigned from the College of Cardinals in July after allegations that he sexually abused minors and adults over decades. The head of the Islamic State in Afghanistan and 10 other ISIS fighters were killed last night in airstrikes, according to an Afghan official. The strike was carried out by Afghan and coalition forces in the Nangarhar province along the border with Pakistan. The region has become a stronghold for the Islamic State. Airstrikes have increased in Afghanistan as ISIS control has weakened in Iraq and Syria. Tomorrow marks the 50th anniversary of the first U.S. Open tennis tournament here in New York. The main stadium at the Flushing Queens facility is named for the first winner of the tournament, African-American tennis champion Arthur Ashe. But while players like the Williams sisters and Sloane Stephens have dominated American women's tennis for the last 20 years, American men have not fared nearly as well. It's been 15 years since Andy Roddick played in the U.S. Open Finals, the last Grand Slam championship won by an American male. NewsHour Weekend's Christopher Booker recently talked with USTA President Katrina Adams about America's inability to field top-tier male players and how efforts to diversify the game may change that. This story is part of our ongoing series about poverty and opportunity in America, Chasing the Dream.
There we go. Would you be able to snap it? I'm not good at selfies.
Even though it's been nearly 20 years since Katrina Adams last played professionally, fans still clamor to have their picture taken with her. As the first former professional player to serve as chairman of the board and president of the U.S. Tennis Association and chair of the U.S. Open, Adams has one of the broadest resumes in tennis. From her earliest days learning to play in Chicago to her 12 years on the WTA Tour, she has lived and breathed the game for most of her life.
The U.S. Open, come on, man, this is New York. It's live, it's happening, it's showtime.
But when Katrina Adams started playing tennis in 1975, It was Arthur Ashe who everyone wanted a picture of. 7 years after his 1968 U.S. Open win had blown open the doors of U.S. tennis for African American men, Ashe was a sensation.
It meant a lot to see him playing this sport that I just picked up. But you go back to 1968 and you look at what was happening in America from a civil rights perspective, from a humanitarian perspective, and then you see Arthur Ashe win and raise that trophy. You know, there's no greater moment in history, I think, for us in tennis than that, because it really started to transcend and transform how tennis was viewed in America.
Ashe's additional Grand Slam wins in Australia in 1970 and Wimbledon in 1975 established him as one of the world's greatest. But his triumphs stand as the last time an American male player of color has won those events. Michael Chang won the French Open in 1989, the last time a non-white American man has won a Grand Slam singles final. In 1996, he was the last American male person of color to even appear in a Grand Slam final. American men have won 98 of the 364 Grand Slams played since 1924. Only 6 of those were won by people of color, just over 6%.
Lieutenant Arthur Ashe.
The numbers have been improving. Of the 18 Americans who qualified for this year's U.S. Open, 4 are players of color. 29-year-old Donald Young, 23-year-old Mackenzie McDonald, 20-year-old Michael Mmoh, and 20-year-old Frances Tiafoe. That represents 22% of the male U.S. players.
They're developing. They're continuing to rise in the ranks. We've had a couple good years here. You've got a couple other youngsters coming up in Frances Tiafoe, Taylor Fritz, Mackie McDonald had an unbelievable showing at Wimbledon. So there are a lot of players that are in the pipeline that are coming up, and in time, they will be back at the top of the ranks.
An integral part of developing a pipeline is finding and cultivating untapped talent in underrepresented communities. After winning the U.S. Open in 1968, Arthur Ashe co-founded the National Junior Tennis League, the NJTL. Since its founding, hundreds of thousands of kids in underserved areas across the country have gone through programs under the NJTL.
All right. If I tap you, I want you to step forward to this line.
The Junior Tennis Champion Center, the JTCC, has been providing free tennis lessons in Washington, D.C. and the surrounding area for nearly a decade.
Some of you are going to be on this court, some of you are going to be over there. Can I have a high five? That was dope.
Throughout the 8-week session, Coach Anessa Taylor and the other coaches are watching closely, looking for 1 or 2 kids who not only show ability, but seem particularly interested in tennis.
What makes one kid stand out from the other at this level?
It's almost that glow or that excitement to be here. Like, you can tell that one kid who's never picked up a racket before, but they're happy to have a racket in their hand, and they're eager to learn. When they're sitting there hugging their rackets, when they're sitting there in their ready position, when they're focused on the ball, I think that's when you really see that potential in that kid, because they're like, I can do this, I can focus, I love it. Let's try with this one.
Of the roughly 400 children who participate in the clinics, about 30 will be offered scholarships to attend training sessions at JTCC's facility in College Park, Maryland. And those scholarships are key. For a handful of players, this can be the beginning of a tennis and education program with the JTCC that can last until they're 18. Many of them will go on to play in college and professionally. 13-year-old Robin Montgomery, who started in one of these programs, won a junior national title this year. And scholarships helped Frances Tiafoe train at the center since he was 8 years old. Now at age 20, he's ranked 42nd in the world.
Younger players like Francis even, he's bringing up tennis in this community, so more people are wanting to play.
19-year-old Justice Jones started at the JTCC when he was 5 years old. Now a sophomore in college, he plays for the University of Delaware.
I definitely think my generation, and including me, we're a part of a change in the game, because usually people like me, they just want to play basketball, football, and all those other sports, but I think we're pushing to play tennis now.
But tennis can be an expensive journey if you want to play competitively.
Our sport is very cheap to learn how to play. It's free for the most part. But once you develop and you start to get on a competitive track, it's not so cheap.
The JTCC estimates that if a young person goes through their entire program, it comes with a price tag of nearly $300,000. There's the cost of coaching, cost of travel to tournaments, entry fees, equipment, trainers, all of which is paid for by the individual, not a team.
Even though we have, hundreds of programs around the country, if your parents aren't in a position to even have the resources to find that program, it's not the first thought, because they're saying, okay, you can make $100 million over here playing basketball or football or baseball, and you might make $100,000 playing tennis.
Now for women, it's the same, but the external factors are different. If you're a top-tier athletic woman, there are few professional leagues for you to play in. Certainly nothing as lucrative as tennis can be for the top players. But if you're a male standout athlete like LeBron James, who grew up playing on the basketball courts in Akron, Ohio, the courts of the US Open may have seemed like a less lucrative option.
He's a phenomenal athlete. I think if he chose tennis and he wanted to be the next Arthur Ashe as an African-American Grand Slam champion, he probably would have been that. I would say and I would hope that a lot of things that we're putting in place now, it takes time for that seed to be watered and to start to grow and to strengthen. And we may be 5 to 10 years away from really seeing an influx of talent of color.
What happens if Frances Tiafoe wins the Open this year?
Frances Tiafoe wins the Open this year, I'm going to do cartwheels, I'll tell you that. It would be amazing to see that happen. I mean, obviously you've got the likes of Rafa Nadal, Roger Federer, Novak Djokovic, Sasha Zverev, these top guys that are playing really well. And, I think he's primed to do well, but it's anybody's match at the end of the day. And I think if we can get him on that final stage, on that television where the world is tuned in and we can get more young kids of color that are watching him, perhaps he could just start that wave that Venus and Serena did just a few years back.
Finally tonight, Pulitzer Prize-winning playwright Neil Simon has died. According to his publicist, he was 91 years old. Simon was a prolific comedic writer. His hit plays included Barefoot in the Park, The Odd Couple, and the Eugene Trilogy, 3 plays that drew on his upbringing as a Depression-era child raised in New York. Simon also adapted several of his plays into films, including The Odd Couple with Jack Lemmon and Walter Matthau. In addition to the Pulitzer, Simon won 4 Tony Awards, the Mark Twain Prize for American Humor, and had a Broadway theater named after him in 1983. That's all for this edition of PBS NewsHour Weekend. I'm Hari Srinivasan. Thanks for watching. Have a good night.